Okay, hi everyone, we're back, and we're spending the next few weeks just working on our rough draft. And so in the folder for this week, you'll see the rough draft directions, and you'll also find them over here to the left if you just click on rough draft. So I want to take you through just some of the pieces of the rough draft, give you some advice, show you how to do endnotes. So for the rough draft, just like the final draft, the minimum page length is 10 pages. Okay, this rough draft is going to be due November 16th by 11:59 p.m. Just some of the small components here, and let me see if I can make this a bit bigger. So no cover page, and I also would rather you just put your name at the top and maybe the title of your paper. What I don't need, oh, sorry, my dogs are barking. What I don't need are the, the date, my name, the title of the class, where the first page goes down about half a page before you actually start writing. Just put your name and maybe if you have a title for the paper, and then go right into it. The next thing, endnotes in Chicago style. We'll spend some time on that in a minute. And then just the usual, the general stuff, 12-point font, double-spaced, 1-inch margins, Times New Roman, just the real basic stuff that are usually in a paper here. Okay, so let's go into the advice here, okay? So I want you to start with the introduction. So what should be included in the introduction? You can still have the anecdote that we talked about, so that kind of story, that hook paragraph that starts it. But what has to be there is a paragraph with your argument. Okay, that's extremely important that you have a clear argument that drives this paper. Okay, and then after that, there needs to be a historiography paragraph, right? That at minimum explains how the appropriate course reading answers your research question. Okay, and so remember, just the historiography simply refers to what historians have written about a particular topic. And so if you've read more than the course reading associated with your topic, you can also include that literature, right, in the historiography paragraph. But at minimum, you need that book that we read in class that's associated with your research project in that historiography paragraph. So you explain how that reading or readings have answered your research question. And then, this is extremely important, that's why it's in bold here with also, that you need to explain how your research fits with that historiography. And that could simply be a sentence, okay? And so I have some examples here. So if you're writing about the civil rights films, right, you need to state whether your research supports or challenges Theo Harris's claims about the popular memory of the civil rights movement, right? Are you kind of supporting her arguments? Are you challenging some of her arguments? And it doesn't need to be an all or nothing thing, like you agree with everything Theo Harris said, or you disagree with everything Theo Harris says. But you just need to be clear about how your research fits with hers, right? Where do you agree? Where do you disagree? Again, so if you're writing about natural disasters, you need to talk about whether you're supporting or challenging Steinberg's claims. If you're writing about military recruiting, state whether your research supports or challenges Bailey's claims. That's really essential here in the rough draft and the final draft, and it's going to be something I look for when I'm grading. Okay, and so the rest of this paper is going to just center on supporting your argument with primary and secondary sources. And my big piece of advice here, because it's, once you start getting into a long paper like this, especially if you're not used to writing things that are 10 pages or more, that it's easy to kind of get sidetracked along the way. And one of the things that, I'm just finishing a book that's, 300 pages long. And one of the things that I do is when I'm editing is to think about whether this paragraph supports my argument. How is it actually supporting the argument? If it's not, then I need to get it out or I need to rewrite it. And so one of the things as you start writing is to always think about how is this particular paragraph advancing my argument, right? And if it's not, it needs to be revised or taken out. Okay. Now, some of the writing issues that I'm going to look for in this draft. Okay. So one of the things that I want you to get out of your writing is what we call passive voice. Okay, and so I have some examples here of passive voice. I have a link here to passive voice. If you've never heard that before, look at that link. That's one thing that I'll be looking for. Some things that I saw in some of your writing in the prospectus is just avoid colloquial slang language, like something like the film rubbed me the wrong way. So get that stuff out. Another thing that I saw in some of the proposals, prospectus that I want you to get out are the I believe, I think, I feel language. And one of the reasons why we try to get that out is because it suggests that you are uncertain. Okay, and so we want you to have some confidence in this paper. And one of the ways to get that across is to get that feely language out of your writing. Okay, this one's usually the hardest for people to revise because you might not have heard this from any professor before. One of the things that I'm going to look for in the rough draft to try to improve your writing is to try to reduce your reliance on the verb to be. And the conjugations of that are things like is, was, were. Okay. The reason why we want to get that out of your language or out of your writing is because it's the weakest verb in the English language. And so if we just rewrite the sentence and substitute is, was, were, we can usually make that sentence much stronger and clearer when we get those words out. And so it's impossible to remove it completely. But one of the goals that I have for you when you're editing is to look for those words, is, was, were, and to see if you can rewrite that sentence without that verb in there. Okay, and so I'll help you with that in the rough draft if it's still there a bit too much. Okay, so this is another one. So you might not have heard this term before, which is orphan quotes. And so an orphan quote basically is a quote that's where you don't introduce the author in the text when you quote. And so, for example, I have an example here. So the civil rights movement, quote, changed the country. And so you likely got changed the country from another author somewhere, but you just insert it with a quote. And you can't do that. Some disciplines actually allow that, and it's just really bad form. And so I want you to get these orphan quotes out. And so an example of how would you kind of revise this? You might say, so if an author by the last name Thompson, or Heather Thompson wrote change the country, and you get that out of her book, you can say, for example, as Heather Thompson states, the civil rights movement changed the country. Okay, so you need to attribute a quote to someone, or let's say you're writing with a lot of newspaper articles. You could say, for example, as a New York Times journalist states, right, something like that. But we just need to know where that quote actually came from. Okay, in the text, not just in the citation. Okay, so this one's should be an obvious one, right? Avoid long, clumsy sentences. So one of the things I want you to look for as you're editing this rough draft before you send it to me is to look for sentences that have lots of clauses in it, that are a bit too long. It's always better to break these long sentences up into shorter sentences. And I think that that's a mistake that a lot of undergraduates make, that they think longer sentences make them sound smarter. But actually, it's more difficult to write clear, short sentences. That actually makes you sound smarter than these long, clumsy sentences. Okay, another goal I have for you is only quote when necessary. Another mistake that a lot of undergraduates make in their writing is they think they just need to fill the entire paper with lots and lots of quotes. Okay, and so clearly, I mean, some quotes are great, but whenever you quote, you take away your own voice. All right, and we want your voice to be prominent in this paper. And so think about, if you're inserting a quote, is it absolutely necessary to insert? Does it add something that you couldn't just add by yourself, just by paraphrasing or writing it a different way? Okay. And the last one, just avoid unnecessary adjectives and adverbs. Like the classic ones that are completely unnecessary are things like, it was very important. Well, do you really need very in there? Right? And so try to avoid those unnecessary adjectives and adverbs. I have the grading rubric here. This historiography section is just that historiography paragraph that you're writing where you're talking about what's been written. about your topic and then how your research kind of fits in. Right, see that just by having a really clear, strong thesis statement, that's 20 points right off the bat, right? But most of this is graded based on the body of your paper, where you're really analyzing primary sources in order to advance your argument. Okay, now let's get into endnotes, because I'm sure that a number of you have never used endnotes before. I want to show you exactly how you put that in. So for most of you who have a more recent version of Word, it's going to be here, right? And so you click on References, and then you have an option to insert footnote or insert endnote. And I'm looking for endnotes, not footnotes, okay? And the only difference between these two is as you're writing, a footnote will just appear at the number will appear at the bottom of the page. So all of the notes for this particular page will come at the bottom. An endnote will look exactly the same, except it will come all the way at the end of the document. Okay, so all of the notes will be at the end of the document after your text. And the reason why I like endnotes more than footnotes is because I can kind of keep track of your page lengths a bit better. So some people, if they're struggling to meet the 10 pages, will just start inserting footnotes everywhere. And so the text will represent about half the page and footnotes will represent half the page. And really, they only wrote about 5 pages of text. Okay, so that's the only reason why I'm looking for endnotes rather than footnotes. And so let me bring up a paper by a student in our kind of senior thesis class, and to show you how this person wrote some of these endnotes in here. So my advice is, let's say you might have lots of notes for one paragraph, for example. And so the choices that you have, so let's say we go in here. So he has this quote in here from a congressperson. And so if he wanted to put a citation in here for every single sentence, he probably could, because a lot of these sentences probably come from different books or articles, and you could simply put a note after almost every single sentence. I suggest that you don't do that, and at the end of the paragraph, you insert a note, okay? And so in that note, and I'm going to show you, you can see here, since we're not using footnotes, the note doesn't come here. I'm going to double click here and it'll take us all the way to the end of the document. Okay, and so there's going to be, he ends the paper here, and there's going to be a line here, and all of the notes for the entire paper, right, come at the end. And so I'm going to show you what happens when you have lots of notes, maybe for just one paragraph. Another common mistake people make is they think, okay, so I understand that I want to put notes at the end of the paragraph, and they'll say, well, I have 3 different citations. And so, of course, what I need here are 3 different notes. So they have 1, 2, 3 here. And what that would look like is if I keep hitting it, 1, 2, and we'll go back. See, we don't want this. We don't want multiple notes at the end of one paragraph. We just want 1. Okay, and so how do we put multiple notes in a single citation? All you do, and I'm going to look for the end of his citation, which is right here, and let me zoom in. You can see what divides the notes is just a semicolon here, okay, and then you start the next note. So we can put in, here's another one. So he has 3 different citations in this one note, all right? So we don't need different numbers for every single citation that goes into a footnote. We can just have one footnote, have multiple citations in one, and just divide them by this semicolon. Okay? Now let's go back. Now I have a link for you. Go back to. I have a link for Chicago Style here, which is the same link that gets you back to the Purdue OWL Chicago Style citation that I gave you for the prospectus. Now I want to point out, let's go to books. So for the prospectus, you were using a bibliography, right? And so here, this B represents how to cite things in a bibliography. Now that we're doing endnotes, we're not requiring a bibliography, What we're looking for is this N represents notes, okay? This shows you how to do a citation for endnotes and footnotes, okay? But remember that we're doing footnotes, but this represents how to do both. Looks exactly the same. And so this is how we're going to cite. There are basically just small differences between the two, but there are important differences. So try to look back at the Purdue OWL Chicago Style Guide, and we're always looking, when we're looking at how to cite something, we're looking for the example under N, okay, not B. Okay. I also have here, go back up, some links here to Word's advice on how to actually put in endnotes. So if anything that I just said was confusing, or maybe you have a different version of Word, what I suggest is, if you don't see it represented in one of these two links, is to look up your particular version of Word, how to insert endnotes, and look at it there. If you still are having trouble, then feel free to email me and I can walk you through it. All right. Now, for the next couple of weeks, what I have in the what I'm going to have in the folders is just a response. I'm going to click on this, and it's not a separate assignment. Okay, all it's asking you is, what progress have you made on your research and a rough draft, and to be really specific for me. Okay, so don't just say, I did some more research this week, or I did a couple of hours of research. Tell me exactly where you were researching, what you actually found. If you're making progress on your rough draft, how much of it did you get done? Are you working on your introduction? Are you, 2 pages in and you're working on X, Y, and Z? So be as specific as you can, because I want to keep track of where you are in the process. Okay, and I also want you to list, if you have any questions, if you're running into any problems, to put that in here and list any ways that I might be able to help you. And again, this is just a way to kind of keep you accountable for kind of continuing to do work over these next couple of weeks, because we're not kind of working in the classroom where I can kind of watch you work. And also, I would just want to keep track if you're falling behind, if I can kind of help you and insert myself into the project so you don't fall too far behind. All right, so this isn't designed for extra work for you. It's just designed for me to kind of keep track of where you are and to make sure people don't fall behind. And we're addressing any questions as they come in. Okay. All right. So I hope this video was helpful. Again, the rough draft is due November 16th by 11:59 p.m. and there'll be an upload link here on Blackboard for you to insert that in here, just like the prospectus. But again, if you run into any problems, if anything in the video wasn't clear for you and you need to ask some questions, always email me, and we can either go back and forth over email or Skype or over phone. All right. Good luck with the assignment. I'm looking forward to reading your rough drafts and answering your questions over the next few weeks.